It's great to welcome to the program Cenk Uygur, who is, of course, known to many in our audience as the longtime host of the Young Turks, also congressional candidate seeking to represent California's 25th district. Cenk, it's so great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, David.
So there's so much to discuss, but I'm going to first, let's just assume my audience does not know your platform. I know many of them do, but let's start there, issue oriented. What is it from a policy perspective that you want to bring to the House of Representatives?
Yeah, so the main reason I'm running is because I got tired of people not talking about the corruption. So some folks are now beginning to touch on it. They're using that word, but they're not explaining to people what the heart of the problem is and how to fix it. So the reality is, actually, almost every American, including almost every Republican voter, let alone Democratic voter, knows that if ExxonMobil is giving a politician money, that's a bribe. Now, the Supreme Court legalized those bribes through Citizens United and other decisions, but they're bribes nonetheless. Nobody thinks that they're giving it for charity. But yet, not only will the Republicans say, no, no, they are. They just happen to agree with ExxonMobil, right? But 80% of the Democratic Party agrees to that same fiction. And the corporate media also agrees to that same fiction. Isn't it amazing that they write thousands upon thousands of articles about politics and never talk about the actual cause of the legislations, the electoral victories, the heart of what actually politics is? Money is about 90% of what you should talk about in politics because that's what determines the elections. But the media never talks about it. It really is stunning. So I'm here to point out the bribery and run a clean campaign. But then that has effect on every other issue. So let's take a look at Medicare for all. My opponent, for example, is taking money from insurance companies. So obviously I'm running corporate PAC free, no lobbyist money, etc. So I don't know if it's a real opinion that everybody in the country shouldn't have health care. I don't know if it's a real opinion the private insurance system should be maintained, or if it's that way because you got paid for that opinion. Me, on the other hand, whether you like my policy stances or not, you know at least there's no question that I'm honest and it's my real opinions. We need Medicare for all in this country. 45,000 people a year die because they don't have health insurance. That's unconscionable. I mean, imagine if 45,000 people a year died because they didn't have private fire insurance and we just let them burn to death. And then a presidential candidate comes out and says, fire insurance for those who want it. No, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, end the school shootings, you name it. And David, one more thing, and we can talk about every one of those issues and a lot more, is that it's not just that I'm more progressive. It's that there's no fight in the Democrats, in the corporate Democrats. Once they take the corporate money, they unilaterally disarm on their top issue. But again, it affects every other issue. So then they just don't fight the Republicans. I mean, I think almost all the Democrats now have stopped taking NRA money, and they all agree that we should have federal background checks at a bare minimum, right? But they never fight McConnell. They never point out that he takes bribes from the NRA. And so even though 97% of Americans agree with us on federal background checks, the Democrats are so weak and incompetent that they can't force the Republicans to vote and lose on an issue where 97% of Americans agree with them.
Yeah, there's this idea that there's like a false dichotomy that exists when analyzing candidacies like yours and others, which is, he or she is only focusing on stuff they disagree with Democrats on. And it's like, well, hold on a second. We know where the Republicans are on a lot of these issues. Isn't it more relevant to separate yourself from what some other Democrat would do, since that's increasingly the question? I find it to be a false choice between they should only be focusing on what Republicans do wrong. Well, we know what the Republicans are doing wrong. It's important to know where they'd be different from what other Democrats would do as well. That seems to be missing from the analysis.
100%. Look, it's like when right-wingers say, shouldn't you be focusing on what Al-Qaeda does wrong? But guys, we all know that Al-Qaeda is 100% wrong, and we can't influence that at all. We could fight them militarily, but it's not like we could convince Al-Qaeda to go in the right direction. It's already way too late for them. So it's saying like, oh, you should be telling people Republicans are wrong. Yet, of course, that's what we do 24/7. But it's not like Mitch McConnell's going to be like, oh, man, I saw Young Turks and David Pakman show. And they make good points. I'm going to change my mind. Like they just that is a at best a fundamental naivete about how politics works.
So the last 6, 7 days, I have even been surprised about the degree to which, number one, this race is being discussed at this early stage. I mean, it's notable. You could say it's good that your race is being discussed so much at this early stage. However, when you look at what is being discussed, it is a lot of attacks on you coming from a lot of different people. And we have seen establishment legacy media go after you. We have seen attacks from within the Democratic Party start to come after you. And I don't even know how to start the conversation because it seems like there's really two conversations here to be had. One is the establishment versus outsider thing that you've already sort of alluded to. There's another conversation, which I think is the more difficult one to have sometimes within the left, which is the purity test stuff that sometimes can get a little bit toxic. And this all seems to relate to some blog posts you wrote years ago, which you've already copped to and said, I said the wrong thing, I don't stand by the stuff, so on and so forth. And the sort of recycling of that into what seems to me to be a moral argument that is trying to be made against you, including by people who don't even really know who you are, is what I've noticed. Is that how you would summarize it, first of all?
Yeah, David, that's a great summary. I would actually add one other branch. So let me break it down. So first, there's the corporate Democrats, and they are completely disingenuous. So they attack me from day one. They know that they don't like me because I'm too progressive in their minds, right? But they disingenuously attack me as if I was not progressive enough. Now, they don't believe that for a second. And they all released the same talking points on the same day. So it was, and it was the first day of my campaign. So it was clear that it was top down. Somebody in California politics in the Democratic Party said, go get this guy. And because it wasn't just my opponent's campaign, it was every one of these little local state, county groups, et cetera, with the same exact talking points verbatim. None of them ever asked me, hey, why do 50 million progressives watch you every month? That's curious. I mean, if you really are this guy from the blogs from 19 years ago, why do progressives like you? I mean, if I was them, at a bare minimum, if you were anywhere near honest, you would have intellectual curiosity. Well, this is strange, right? But no, none of them reached out. They don't want to reach out. I reached out to one group leader, and he said, I will never talk to you. Okay, way to be a Democrat. Okay, my guess is after I become a congressman, they'll come want to talk to me. So anyway, so those guys are hacks and operatives, and it's clear. And I, as FDR famously said, I welcome their hatred. Okay, because they keep saying, and Christie keeps saying, my opponent, I was handpicked. By who? I think we handpicked people during an election. There were no voters in that backroom deal. I don't know what the backroom deal was. I certainly wasn't in the backroom. None of the voters were in the backroom. By the way, huge portions of the district were not in the backroom. It's a really insular crowd that makes these decisions for the voters. Sad day for them. We're interrupting that. Jenk2020.com. Okay. They didn't see this coming. By the way, so far over 22,000 individual donations. We scared the living hell out of them. The reason they're being so aggressive is because they had no idea what kind of challenge we could mount for them. They're used to like, oh, progressives, please. We have the money. You don't have the money. They're used to dismissing us. They can't do that with my campaign, and they're reeling. So that's one group. The other group is the corporate media. And I'm actually, even having covered them for all this time and having done a critique of them and saying they have groupthink, they're in a bubble, etc., I was actually surprised that it went further than that. They were outright malicious. They wrote things that were not remotely true, and they seem to have done it on purpose.
Yeah, well, so let me bring up one just so the audience knows. So there's this New York Times thing. You've interviewed David Duke in the past. And like you, I've interviewed lots of extremists. And anybody who understands how these interviews goes understands that you don't fight every point to the death, because at a certain point you wouldn't be able to get past the first question, right? I mean, like we're trying to understand where the extremism comes from and see the internal logic. And in a way that, what I tweeted this example when I interviewed Richard Spencer once, I pointed out he once dated Asian women. It seems to go against his white supremacy. He eventually said he doesn't do that anymore. And I wrapped that topic up by saying, fair enough, let's move on. And I was attacked because when I said fair enough, it apparently suggested I agreed with the position or that I was coddling the view. Very similarly, when you interviewed David Duke, at a certain point, you sort of concede that you're not going to agree and you're going to move on. And the New York Times picked up on a completely out of context soundbite to imply that you were in some way agreeing with the guy.
Yeah, David, it was actually slightly worse than that.
Okay.
Because it was at the end of an hour-long interview where I yelled at him, sometimes at the top of my lungs.
Yes.
Okay, and called him an anti-Semite, a bigot, a racist, etc. And at the end of the interview, he says, "Now, Cenk, you know I'm not a racist," and which is the most hilarious thing anyone's ever said from a former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan and a guy who just for an hour straight talked about how racist he was. And I sarcastically go, "No, of course not." And the New York Times took that and printed it as if I was agreeing with David Duke and I told him that he was not anti-Semitic or racist, right? And so and I told the reporter, I talked to her and I said, "You just watch the interview. It's okay. If you watch the interview, you'll give it proper context. You don't have to agree with me on anything. All you got to do is watch the interview." She said, "Oh no, I'm definitely going to watch the interview." We sent it to her right after our call, and she wrote it as if I agreed with his anti-Semitism. That's why I say I was stunned that it wasn't just negligence. That appeared to be malicious, like purposely trying to smear you.
Now, the thing I'm
And
wondering...
David, can I just say one more thing about that? Because I know that you do that all the time. You have these extremists on and you battle them. Now there's this ideology that, no, you should never have that side on. We should just try to do a media blackout of them. But no, it's super important. So when I had David Duke on, I actually learned something really important. I think our audience learned something important from that. Unfortunately, it proved to be very prescient. So I thought he was going to come on in 2015, backing Donald Trump, mainly talking about Latinos and Muslims, because those were the two campaign themes: Muslim travel ban, build a wall, etc. But he hardly mentioned Latinos or Muslims at all. And then I thought, okay, well, it's Grand Wizard, Klan, black people. No, he barely mentioned them. No, he was obsessed with the Jews. The Jews run the world. That's why you see in this short clip we have online where he names a Jewish banker, I name a non-Jewish banker. He names a Jewish person in the media, I name 8 non-Jewish people in the media to debunk his conspiracy theory. But the important lesson from that was, oh my God, they're going to come for the Jews. And then what happened? Trump gets into office, synagogue shooting after synagogue shooting, and Charlottesville. And they chant the Jews will not replace us. Because what I found out in that interview is, despite all their racism and bigotry, and it's, by the way, this is backed up by the national stats.
Oh yeah.
Still, the #1 hate crime is against Jews in America. Because in their crazy right-wing conspiracy theories, when you go all the way down the rabbit hole, it's that the Jews run the world and they're the #1 enemy. And if you don't talk to them, you're not going to find that out.
No question about it. We're going to go to a break on the broadcast show, but continue our conversation with Cenk on the YouTube channel. So I understand that corporate media often has a bias, #1, to the status quo, and #2, to salaciousness. So even reporters who can't pronounce your name if their life depended on it are sure that they need to talk about all of the bad things that you've done and said, etc. I understand that piece. The part that to me is getting a little concerning is that even like personal friends I know on my Facebook page are tweeting stuff, having no idea who you are, about how you'd better not support this guy, and this person and that person had better retract their endorsement. And it's starting to me to seem like one of these sort of circular firing squad, self-destructive things. I mean, make it about policy. And I've not seen anybody say, hey, you know what? Cenk's wrong on this policy, and I love the policy of Cenk's opponent. I'm seeing none of that. I'm seeing the types of attacks that to me are completely self-destructive.
So, David, that's the third group. So there's the corporate Democrats, disingenuous. There's the corporate media that turns out to be even more hostile to progressives than we realize. Then the third group is, I think, honest actors who we agree with on the policy, but we now disagree on a really interesting issue/tactic, right?
Yes, yes.
So when you and I battle right wingers, some portion of those folks who are genuine progressives don't like that. And there's this thing called cancel culture. So, and it's a legitimate and interesting debate to have. You and I happen to fall on the side of no, if you ignore them, they don't go away, they fester, right? And by the way, David, you were doing this more than anyone else. You and Sam Cedar are probably the top at it. And for a while, we actually tried that. Anna and I stopped talking about the right wing at all. We stopped talking about Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and Milo and all those guys, and we hoped that they would go away. They didn't go away. That tactic totally did not work. Now, you can say, hey, I don't care that it doesn't work. I just don't want those monsters to get 1 second extra of airtime, even if you're battling them. We happen to disagree on that. But that doesn't make us bad people, and that doesn't make the opposite side bad people either, meaning the progressives who are in that cancel culture and not deplatforming, et cetera. But it's a real intellectual disagreement. But if they take it further and they go, well, Cenk Uygur or David Pakman are bad people that are not really progressives because they platform people, well, then I would say, okay, you've crossed the line. Well, you cross the line from an interesting intellectual conversation or debate into being unfortunately malicious. I'm not doing that to them, as you could tell here, right? I'm saying, I hear you, brothers and sisters, but let's talk it out.
When you think about the path forward for the campaign, you've got the stuff from the blog posts and the corporate media reaction to that. You've got some of these folks that you agree with on policy, but seem to disagree on tactics. You've got arguments like Cenk doesn't live in the district, therefore, ... fill in the blanks. What's the strategy for dealing with this? Because you actually, since it's gotten national attention, you may need one strategy nationally, but then also something different when you're talking to the voters in the district.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, as part of the national conversation, and your viewers are obviously all over the country, look, there's two things that are happening now. The corporate media is overwhelmingly against me. Every article is against me. They make it seem like my entire history is being some sort of right-wing misogynist. And they all know that's not true. They all know that they've critiqued me before for being too progressive. It's so disingenuous. So that's millions of dollars in free media to smear me. Plus, all the corporations I criticize are now pouring in money to my opponent. Plus, all the Democratic Party, they're like, oh, no, he's going to call out the corruption, pouring in millions to my opponent. So Cenk2020.com, it's so important that we fight back. And if you guys help out, we can fight back on every level here. So nationally, I'm saying, for God's sake, is any reporter ever going to ask about the issues? I was on the phone with an LA Times reporter, and I literally asked him, this is my second time talking to you. There was an initial article, then there was this. And I said, are you ever going to ask about the issues? And he was honest enough to say no. He said, we do 2 to 3 articles on a race like this, and this is going to be the second one. And no, I'm not going to ask you about the issues in this interview. Okay, well, he didn't write that in the story, but at least he told me, and at least there's a modicum of honesty there. I just do sensationalism. I don't care about the issues. But the thing is, for people's lives in the district, what I wrote 19 years ago is the least relevant thing on planet Earth. Whether they're going to have health care is the most relevant thing there is. Whether there's going to be school shootings when their kids go to those schools is the most relevant thing on Earth. And also, there's so many important local issues. There's like environmental disasters all over the district. There's so many fires. The biggest gas leak in American history it was the Aliso Canyon gas leak that's in our district. We have a Boeing facility that's leaking radioactive material into the water. And then you've got homelessness running amok in Lancaster and Palmdale. So these are super important issues. And it's amazing how little the press cares about it.
Yeah, well, that's what my focus, nobody really needs to adjudicate whether they like or don't like, the fact that you rated women in the past or whatever the case is, because the question is not about whether any kind of crime was committed. Nobody has asserted that. This is not an issue. What we're talking about is, does that mean you put someone in whose healthcare policy won't actually get healthcare to everybody who needs it? Or do we, because of these things that Cenk said, which he has already talked about and completely disavowed, Do we say, let's put in someone that is going to do nothing about campaign finance reform, for example? And that's why I think the lack of discussion about issues is so acutely disturbing, because what's implied in that is that they essentially don't matter. It's basically assessing someone's character on the basis of old blog posts. That's how we pick people to represent us now. That's scary to me.
Yeah. So look, on as far as my opponent's concerned, I totally understand her strategy because Democratic voters agree with me almost universally, and they don't agree with her positions. So I'm for Medicare for all. 81% of Democratic voters want Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Now, why would she be so bad at politics to be against 81% of the voters? Well, it's because of the donors. Her donors told her, I don't care if you lose this race, but under no circumstances are you allowed to be for Medicare for all. And it's not just her donors, it's the donors of the Democratic Party. That's why the orders come from down top, from the top down all the way to Christie. Say, no, the party is against Medicare for all. In fact, Joe Biden said it the other day. He said the party's not there yet. Not that the voters aren't there yet, the party's not there yet. So Democratic parties decided we're going to try to sink Medicare for all. It's definitely because of their corruption. I'm super clear on that, and that's why they can't stand me. That's why they're trying to bury me. But at least I understand why Christie's trying to avoid the issues, because the issues are terrible for her. The media, on the other hand, they pride themselves on being cynical. Like, I know that actually nothing in life matters. Thank God. Why are you a reporter? If you think nothing matters, then why do you cover the news? What a strange, toxic culture there is in the mainstream press. Don't talk about the issues, only do character assassinations and personal attacks and things that are scandalous or salacious because no one cares. Then why'd you get into this profession? Why don't you go be a doctor or a lawyer or something? Make some money.
Hey, two quick things, and I know you've got to run. One is California is a jungle primary, meaning everybody is sort of running against each other in the primary, Republicans and Democrats. And one of the people running on the Republican side is George Papadopoulos, who is this Trump associate who was indicted. Does he throw a wrench into what you're doing at all, or is it just talk about your issues and just go forward and do your thing?
No, first of all, he doesn't exist. I haven't. So I've gone to these campaign events. I've never seen Papadopoulos. I don't know that he's ever been in the district. So right now, I'm all over the district. I'm knocking on doors. They see me at their door and they're like, "You're running for Congress, and you're at my door." Like, because I'm going to areas of Lancaster and Palmdale that are heavily Latino or African American. They've never had anyone come knock on their door and ask them, what would you like? My job is to represent you. Okay. So, but Papadopoulos is nowhere to be found. But to be fair, he might be in the witness protection program.
Which will make it hard to win.
Yeah. And speaking of platforming or not, I've told all of my opponents, and there's actually 13 people in the race, debate anytime, anywhere. Okay, so corporate Democrat, you think I'm a monster and you think you have all this dirt on me. By the way, quick aside there, the last tweet she put out was like, another damning video. It was me arguing for the two-state solution. And then even some of her own supporters were like, wait, are you against the two-state solution? Why is that damning? Right, and she's like, backpedal. So my point is, she doesn't want to debate because she actually wants to avoid every single issue there is. The Republicans are running for me. I'm right here. Come at me, bro. So especially the Republicans and guys like Papadopoulos who couldn't possibly hang in a debate with me.
So as far as the endorsements, which you've said you're not accepting endorsements, the way this entire thing has gone, do you feel betrayed by some people that you thought were in your corner and at least publicly now can't be? I mean, I can imagine that doesn't feel particularly good.
Yeah. No, actually, I swear to God, I don't feel that at all. And because, man, to give you a little internal dynamics here, the folks who endorsed me were wonderful and courageous. And I actually deeply, deeply appreciate it. And the last thing I want to do is get them in trouble. And the press loves smear by proxy. Okay, so no, I don't feel bad about that at all. some folks who never even went in that direction, that's a slightly different story. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So understand that, don't get upset at Bernie and Roe and Nina. They were wonderful, wonderful. They were the first to come out, and they took tremendous courage to back me, knowing how the smear machine has come after me over and over again. They knew that, and they still took that risk. So I give them all the credit in the world. But really, David, there's like, one day I'll tell the stories, but there's groups that are unfortunately disingenuous, and did a lot of backroom machinations against me. It's not at all their membership in those groups. The membership is awesome, but some of the leadership is in bed with the corporate Democrats, and they think, oh, I'm going to get 7% more if I work with Pelosi and Feinstein to help their handpicked candidate. So let's purposely, maliciously try to bury the progressive while pretending to be either a progressive group, a somewhat progressive group, etc. And so some of that happened. And so there are a couple of names I wrote down on a list.
All
I'll
right.
see
Well,
them.
someday maybe we will get a look at that list. An incredible a race in California's 25th, in that it is really a case study, actually, in a lot of the sort of worst of status quo politics, which we're obviously going to keep following. We've been speaking with Cenk Uygur, who is running to represent California's 25th district in Washington, D.C. Cenk, always so good to talk to you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, David. And please, everybody, cenk2020.com. And even if you don't want to donate, you can volunteer. You can make calls from anywhere. This is people power versus corporate power. The battle's in the 25th. cenk2020.com. Thank you, guys.